horror and revulsion of this situation. So I have a huge respect. So I've basically gone from saying that I have the utmost respect to like John Williams, who is the most symphonic film composer alive today, to people like Trent and Atticus, who are at the other end of the scale. And I sort of love it all. And what I specifically love, not to say just their music, I love the fact that there is now, perhaps more than ever, the greatest range in which composers can play in.
Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a todos, a todas, a este nuevo episodio, nueva entrevista acá en Spoiler Tracks, donde hablamos de compositores, soundtracks y mucho más del mundo de la música en la televisión y en el cine. Y hoy tengo a David Buckley, que acaba de lanzar, acaba de trabajar para el score de The Sandman, la nueva serie de Netflix basada en la novela gráfica o en el cómic de Neil Gaiman. Así que lo voy a introducir con nosotros al queridísimo Dave Buckley. Dave, how are you?
Good, thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. It's an honor to talking to you.
Well, likewise. And I've got to say that if we were doing this interview 3 weeks ago, I would have almost been your neighbor because I was living in Andorra.
Oh my God. And it's a great place to be there?
It's really nice. Yeah, well, my wife's from there. We've been living there for 3 years, but we've now entered the next chapter of our lives, which is in England. So, but I'm ashamed to say that in the 3 years I was in Andorra, I learned the word cerveza and vino, and that's it.
Muy bien. Great.
Good word.
You only need that.
It's got me. I've got by with that.
It's perfect. It's perfect. So, David, the score for The Sandman is beautiful. Congrats.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I really, really love it. You were a fan of the graphic novel, or what did you know about The Sandman before starting this project?
Well, like many projects that I've done, it's not like I've came to it because I am I lived and breathed the show beforehand. It was something that I've got to know intimately and have sort of become a big fan of, but rather like I'm just trying to think of anything else I've done. I mean, there's a show I called The Good Fight, and I wouldn't say that even though it's not based on any pre-existing material, but I would never have watched a legal drama before I started on The Good Fight. I've worked on the 50 Shades franchise. I don't normally watch those type of films before. Yeah, no. But I think part of a composer's job is to be able to enter a universe. And I mean, yes, I suppose it would have been an added bonus had by sort of divine providence, had I been a fan of the shows and the comics. Yes. I don't think it would have done any harm. But I mean, it wasn't like I was saying this is, I read these comics as a kid and this is my lifetime's ambition. My lifetime's ambition is to work on good stories and interesting drama, and from that point of view, it became fulfilled on this project. And the very first thing I did when I got the job was to kind of get up to speed, read the comics online, talk to the creators, find out things, understand this universe of which I was a little bit familiar, but no, it wasn't massively on my radar.
I never read the comic book, but the series, the TV show is amazing. It's amazing.
Well, I think another thing is with any, when often books get turned into movies or shows or a play gets turned into a show or whatever. I mean, there's always going to be a big difference in any case because it's effectively, yes, you're using the DNA of something. And I think Neil's voice and vision is very apparent throughout the television show, but it is a new medium. I mean, it's not a comic book, it's a television show. So it's got to, in some way, shape or form, move on into a slightly different angle. And yeah, it's not just, I'm not creating music for a comic, I'm creating music for a television show. And so I think that it's an obvious point, but it's probably worth making.
Exactly. You're right. So did you have contact with Neil Gaiman or only with the developers, David Goyer and Anna Haber, before and during the songwriting?
My main point of contact was Alan, the showrunner.
Yeah.
And so I think, partly because I think with any, especially in television, you can often find yourself having like tons of producers and tons of executives and creatives and opinions. And I mean, obviously all voices need to be heard, and especially Neil's and David's, two hugely important players. But Alan's job in many ways was to, as well as bringing his own sensibilities to everything, was also to pull comments and thoughts from Neil, from David, from other creatives, and kind of discuss them with me. What we need to do, where we need to go. I have subsequently to the release of the show, I have had nice communications. Funnily enough, the first face-to-face communications with Neil and David, they both sent me very nice emails congratulating me and all the rest of it. But yeah. Alan was the sort of creative partnership, really. He and I, and that as I say, that began with non-musical conversations about story, plot, characters, feelings, yes. Emotions. And then we morphed that into conversations about music and all the rest of it.
And what exactly did they ask you for the music for this show?
Well, they didn't. I wouldn't say they dictated. There was never. Well, I'll qualify that. There were a few things that they thought they didn't want for us. And so, for example, they didn't want an overtly. They definitely didn't want the music to stray into kind of sci-fi territory. And they didn't want the music to be overtly kind of digital or harsh. That's not, well, let me be not harsh, but that's because there are moments where the music can have some bite to it. But I think it's that digital. They didn't want to hear anything that sounded like synthetic. They were not opposed to anything that was manipulated, but I think they wanted this organic feel, whether it was from an orchestra, whether it was from an instrument, wherever it was from. It can sound weird, it can sound otherworldly, but they didn't want it to sound like anything that would say sci-fi or anything that would sound kind of overly digital. So those were two things that they had experimented with music prior to me coming on, and I think time and time again, those were conclusions that they had reached, and I thought it was fair enough. I didn't want to combat, with them on that. I thought those were two fairly good calls. And so that, two things that they didn't want. What they did want, they weren't, saying you must do this, you must do that. But I think, feelings and human emotions and warmth and, making sure that, especially to people who don't know the comics, where you might not, you may not have that same kind of passion about the stories because you're just coming to it cold. I think they wanted to sell pretty rapidly that these are characters who, we want to care about them, and they're complex characters as well.
Yes.
And they're different characters as well. A character like Death, who's in episode 6, is not, if one didn't have a conversation about this, if I hadn't seen it or read it and they said, oh, there's a character called Death, my initial instinct would be to do something kind of grave and serious and foreboding. But obviously I watched the show, I watched the episode, and we had a conversation. It's like, no, we don't want that. We want Death to be beautiful. It's this lovely, warm, kind gesture that she's offering before people die. So it's got its own perspective on all these things. And but I really strove, I think, ultimately to try and write some. I would hate to say that I wrote really beautiful music, because that sounds like
but it is.
But I wanted to write things that sounded beautiful.
Exactly.
That was sort of, and by beautiful, I don't mean not necessarily pretty. I mean, maybe heartbreaking, maybe melancholy, maybe there could be a sadness to it. But I think I always. So there's a difference between beauty and prettiness. I wasn't looking for it to be kind of glossy and pretty or anything like that. And there's majestic moments. I think there's a whole range of emotions within the story, and clearly there is.
Yes, because the Sandman has various genres: fiction, mystery, magical moments, drama, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And I think and one of the things actually that. It wasn't that they told me not to do this, they just told me that this wasn't what it was. This isn't the story. And my heart kind of leapt for joy when they told me this. They said, and it's not an action. This is not an action show. And
yes.
I thought, oh God, that's so nice to hear, because it means that you can concentrate on things. When something's action driven, there's a part of you that thinks, right, okay, I've got to keep the energy going. I've got to keep the pulse. I've got to keep the propulsion. And a lot of work I've done in my back catalogue has involved those things. I'm not saying my excuse me, my action scoring days are over, but yes. I certainly. Oh boy, I've just really caught something in my throat.
You need some water?
I'll see how I do. I might need to. I think I'm okay.
Okay.
But knowing that this was concentrating more on human emotions than pacing and like energy and just being percussive, it was nice, because it means like you could really start trying to get under the surface of the characters and really trying to feel who they are musically, as opposed to just pushing them from scene to scene, which in action that sometimes you can fall foul to that problem.
Yeah, of course. And David, as a composer, what was the most difficult challenge to make this score?
Well, I think it was. Have you seen any of the episodes yet?
Yes.
I think it's the fact that it's so unusual that, especially the first 7 episodes, that we are really moving vividly from one scenario to another. I can't actually recall seeing a show where that happens before, where in the first episode we're in whatever it was, I think just post-war, the end of the First World War. Second episode we're in this sort of mythical Cain and Abel world in the dreaming. Third episode we're in present day London. Then we're in hell. Then we're in this messed up diner in America. Then we're it's like crazy, the hopping nature of it. And and it's not, when I say it's crazy, it's cool crazy. It's not to its detriment that this is Neil's story, that it's got this like eccentric journey. So, but what it means for me is I have to think, well, how do I honor that eclecticism, dramatic eclecticism, but also try and keep some consistency, so it doesn't just sound like I'm scoring a completely different show one after another. And that was a challenge. I think I can't, it's hard to put in words how I think I may have cracked it, apart from there are, Dream has a melodic motif which is used throughout, and I think by referring to that, it helps people know, well, okay, we might be in hell, but this is still the Sandman. We might be in a diner, but this is still the Sandman. So I think using some thematic musical devices was a big part of that. But I have to say, initially it was a bit intimidating to watch these initial episodes and think, geez, okay, hold on, what's going on here? It's like, this is crazy. But then when you actually kind of slightly give in to the fact that this is different and this is unusual, I think it actually was, ultimately, I think it made me gave me more creativity, because I thought, it's more inspiring. I'm not often in a television show, you can establish the tone of the score in your pilot, in your first episode, and then you kind of run with it for 10 episodes, 6 episodes, whatever it might be. Here, there was a lot more scope to kind of, weave in and out and add things and subtract things, and for it to kind of be a developed kind of thing. It wasn't like all the answers were there in episode 1. There's still more to come.
Yes. And talking about that, what is the big difference between working on the music of a movie that maybe is 2 hours long and a TV show that has around 8, 9, or 10 episodes?
Yeah, I mean, well, for a start, you're writing a hell of a lot more music. So, I mean, I think in total, there's probably about 8.5 hours of music that I wrote for the show. And in a movie, but yeah, let's say a movie's 2 hours. I mean, unless you're working on I mean, let's say a 2-hour movie, I suppose you might have to do 90 minutes of score. Unfortunately, I still think that's too much. I think everything has too much score in it. There's a tendency to, there's some shows and films where it's an impressive amount of restraint, where the music is used tastefully at specific moments. But I think we have got into a bit of a habit. I'm talking not about the Sandman in general. I'm talking about across the board. I think music's a bit too over present, and we could probably do with finding a few more moments of silence. But so we're talking about, perhaps 90 minutes of score in a film as opposed to 8.5 hours here. So, I mean, that's an obvious difference. I mean, I think the other thing is, well, connected with that, of course, it just means that the arcs, the shapes are just much bigger as well. I mean, in a movie, your beginning, middle, and end are just, the course of events happens over a more contained time. Here we are, everything's stretched out, everything's elongated. Again, an obvious comment, but it does affect things. It does change the way you approach scoring. I mean, I can't say that I would wear a different hat. So if I say, oh, this is a television show, oh, now I'm working on a movie, I can't say that I become a different composer. I still think I look at it all the same. And whatever one's trying to come up with, I don't think that process of coming up with something is different. It doesn't matter how long it is. I mean, I've worked on, I think the shortest thing I've ever worked on was a 5-second commercial. Literally, can you write music for this 5-second commercial? The answer turned out actually to be no, I can't, because I don't know how to do that. By the time I've written the note, the bloody thing's finished. And then the longest thing is, probably a show like this, with a lot of music in 10 episodes. But the approach is, broadly speaking, the same. You're looking at the screen, you're looking at the drama, and you're thinking, what can I bring? What can I add? What will help bring, whether it's trying to sell something in a commercial, try and sell something on the screen, what elevates it somehow. And not only what elevates it, I think also, certainly with film and television, it's what sort of makes the music not just copying what's on the screen. It's sometimes that's required of you, that something is scary, please write scary music, or something is sad, please write sad music. But when you get opportunities to write music where you're kind of doing something a bit at odds with what's on the screen and what you're watching, that can be quite interesting, both as a composer and I think also as a listener. You feel something a little bit different.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you, David. I love to do that question to all composers that I interview, and is the next question is: you translate scenes, characters, feelings, and more into music. How does your brain work, and how do you do that?
Wow, that's a good question. It's funny, really. It's like, I feel when a question like that, it's a bit like you could ask me the same question about, how do I make a sentence in English? Like, I don't think about it. Partly, I don't think about it. But the process I would go to is, I mean, when I start something, I try and be quite respectful to the fact that the composer's pretty late to all of this. They've been making the scripts years and years ago. In the case of the Sandman, they tried to make some version of this for bloody 2 or 3 decades or something. So there've been some people, Neil, who've been, trying to get this off the ground for a long time. Various studios have been involved. But anyway, that's all sort of before I even, knew I wanted to do this for a living. But I am trying to be reverential to the fact that there's lots of parts of this process that have happened before I have even been offered it, looked at it, whatever. So I do try and, at the beginning of my time on a project, I do try and kind of learn from from Alan. I really tried to like tap into him. He was busy because he was still shooting and writing stuff like that. But I really, yes, the script tells me stuff, the picture tells me stuff, but I want to learn. I want to get as deep beneath the surface as I possibly can, and know. I want to ask questions. Why does Dream do this? Why do I feel like this about Dream in episode 1? Why do I? How are we supposed to feel about Ethel Cripps? I literally I would be sitting in my studio here, and I'd either pick up the phone and call Alan, or I'd write him an email. We're not talking about music now. Just how am I supposed to feel about this? How do we want the audience to feel about this?
Yeah.
And in a sense, knowing that stuff and asking those questions, and realizing as well that sometimes my initial watch of it, because obviously I'm watching something without music, I'm watching something without visual effects, I'm watching some stuff where they haven't even filmed everything. There might be like gaps because they've got to shoot some extra scenes. So it's still kind of finding its feet when I start on these things. So to get just normal conversation, a bit like if you said to me, if we were sitting in a bar and we saw someone over there and we were like just someone on a table next to us and we started discussing, in a sense, it's quite straightforward that it's two people. It's nothing to do with Alan being a writer and a producer and a showrunner. It's nothing to do with me being a composer. It's the fact that we're both English-speaking, intelligent people who can sort of discuss something with exactly the same language. And I think that's my method always for getting into something, is to understand it on the same level that anyone else could, so that I feel if I understand what Dream is or what they want the audience to feel Dream is, if I get that 100%, understand it, believe in it, then I think I can help get that message across to the audience. I think if I'm confused by it, if I'm not sure, even if we're supposed to feel, well, he's ambiguous, there's moments where we really love him and there's moments where we really dislike him, that's fine as well. That's still a clear answer. It means that I have to put some ambiguity into the music. But yeah, and then the music is sort of secondary.
Yes, I love
That's
it.
the afterthought.
Yeah, totally agree. So, David, to finish the interview, I want to know who are your favorite composers? All time, and maybe right now, who are your favorite composer right now, and all-time composers?
Of film or anything?
And films and TV shows, yes. No bands or no composer for music and genre.
But what I'll say, this is a slightly snobby answer that I'm going to give here, but I mean, I'm not someone who would typically go and put on a score of a soundtrack. Like I mean, for a start, I don't have much time to put on music of any description. And if there's one type of music I listen to quite a lot, it's my 3-year-old daughter's songs on her television shows, of which I am not a fan. But yeah, I think it was John Powell who always said this, that film composers don't really want to be listening to film music, because film music's already often indebted to other pieces of music from the past. I mean, I think there's a tradition of film music having, even the very early days of film music, completely attached to 19th century opera and everything like that. So, I mean, sometimes my job requires me to listen to it, and of course, if I'm watching a television show, I don't go like this when the music comes on. So yes, of course, I listen to it. I mean, it's impossible to say that one doesn't have a reverence towards like John Williams and John Barry, Morricone. I do think they're all, they come from a different era, obviously, but I do think that it's sort of timeless. I think, none of us will be around to know this for sure, but my thought is that their stuff will live on for a hell of a long time. But I also, I mean, I tell you, I do like Trent and Atticus a lot.
Wow, yes. They're so great.
I do feel there's an economy of scale and size. I mean, I know they have done a couple of scores more recently when they've sort of gone into sort of jazzier territory and perhaps a bit more orchestral, but and I'm sure that was all fine and good. But sometimes when they may be music that I don't necessarily, I think theirs is the sort of score where I'm watching it and I'm just thinking, this is perfect. This is perfect. I don't necessarily know if I was to put it on a record and drink a glass of wine, whether I'd have the same feeling. But that's fine because they've got 9 Inch Nails if they want to do that.
And 9 Inch Nails is one of your favorite bands?
I do. I like them a lot. I think, yeah. I mean, another example of, of what I'm saying is the score to Chernobyl, which Hilda did. I can't whistle at that, or I can't really tell you what was going on because I just can't remember. But I felt all the right things. The sheer horror and revulsion of this situation. So I have a huge respect. So I've basically gone from saying that I have the utmost respect to like John Williams, who is the most symphonic film composer alive today, to people like Trent and Atticus, who are at the other end of the scale. And I sort of love it all. What I specifically love, not to say just their music, I love the fact that there is now, perhaps more than ever, the greatest range in which composers can play in. 60 years ago, you'd have to be writing a symphonic score. Now, if you're a synth guy, or if you play some weird instrument from Turkmenistan, or if you're a singer, you can score a movie, you can score a show. I feel like we have the possibility right now to be more eclectic and creative than we ever have done. I would also say we also concurrently with that rather positive thought on the industry, we also live in very paranoid times where studios are quite risk averse. So they don't, even though there's lots of options for them, they sometimes want to take the more mainstream route because they think they're less likely to lose money because they're not taking a bet. So there's lots of potential there. And I think there's fantastic people operating in so many different genres within the film music genre. And it'd just be nice sometimes if the studios just like loosened their collar a little bit and kind of said, we'll take a few more gambles and see where it ends up.
Yes.
But that's way beyond my pay grade.
Totally agree. So, David, what next for you? Maybe a second season of Sandman, or what next for you?
I would love to hear.
We hope
it's for everyone. Huge amounts of time went into this, and I was on it for about a year, just over a year. I'd love, it'd be the best news to hear that it's getting picked up again, and it'd be the best news to know that I'm coming back as a composer. So I cross fingers that may be
me too.
Something in a not too distant. But meanwhile, to keep me off the streets and out of mischief, I'm finishing up a score for a movie called Kandahar, which is for a director I've worked with twice before, a director called Rick Roman War, and his leading man, who's Jared Butler. So we've done Angel Has Fallen, we've done Greenland, and we're now doing this movie Kandahar, where we're in the Middle East and dealing with the problems in that part of the world. And then concurrently with that, I'm finishing the final ever season of The Good Fight. After 13 years between The Good Wife and Good Fight, this is the 13th year. So
it's possible, yes.
Yeah, I think it is. It's all coming to an end. And it's it's kind of weird. The weird thing for me about that is that it is 13 years, and I don't imagine that I'm ever going to have a run of. I'm never going to work on something again for 13 years. The chances are just not in my favor. So
it's a great TV show.
It's a really good show, and I feel like it's one that's matured as well. I think it really started to forever it started to find a more firmer footing, and I've really enjoyed its kind of political stance, and especially during the Trump era. But what I like about it is it's political, it's opinionated, but it's got a sense of humor. And I think that sort of sums up that show in a way. I mean, there's almost this sense of the world is burning, but what are you going to do? You may as well laugh.
Yeah, I know. No, awesome. David, what's an honor again. Thank you for your time. Please keep doing this great music for TV shows and films.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Thank you. See you. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Gracias, gente. Esto fue una entrevista con Dave Buckley por The Sandman y algunas otras cositas interesantes sobre el mundo de composición musical para películas y series. Nos vemos acá en un próximo episodio de Spoiler Tracks en Spoiler Time. Gracias.